Not much. What's on your mind?
I just saw, I sent it to your inbox. It looks like James Lindsay wrote a giant wall of text about a clip of Andrew on trigonometry where Andrew is saying that Christianity is not a pacifist religion and Lindsay is calling him a Marcionist or a Marcionite or something. Just wondering if you had seen it and if you had a take on what he's saying.
We were going to cover the trigonometry discussion because
Okay.
Kai reached out to me and said that Andrew's discussion was one of the best that he's heard in terms of conveying to people in the political sphere how you can't really have a worldview, or you can't really do politics without having a worldview, and that every position kind of has an underlying paradigm or worldview. So we were going to play that clip, but I didn't know that Lindsay said that. But I'm not surprised because James Lindsay is an absolute idiot when it comes to any of these topics, and we can see that if he's saying that Andrew's position of kind of if the position that the state has a duty to Christianity or to God, that's like the opposite of Marcionism.
Yeah, I don't even really understand like what he's trying to say. Like I skimmed through it
Okay,
because
I'm
he's
pulling
just
it up
so
here.
verbose and he's got me blocked, so it's not like I can reply. But I was just like, Marcionism, like how is this a Marcion?
This would be the
take?
opposite of Marcionism, which would show that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So let's see what he says. He says, it's mind-boggling. I'm not arguing that Christianity should be pacifist. Andrew Wilson gives the example of selling your cloak to buy a sword from the Gospel of Luke. Well, that's actually been used many times to show that Jesus isn't pacifist. I'm an agnostic. He exegetes this wrong. Like, why are we going to listen to some atheist dude exegeting scripture? The point of the story is that Jesus knows he's going to be taken by the Romans. It's not to fight. Well, it is self-defense, though. Jesus says in the next sentence that he's done speaking to his disciples. He's doing it so that he will be taken with the fulfillment of prophecy. Yeah, but none of that shows that it's not self-defense still. Jesus' disciples said they already had 2 swords, and they said it is enough. Fighting off Romans who are there to keep the law? No. If we're looking for an armed band of transgressors, yes. It's not just speculation. The swords are not for fighting or fighting back. Well, even still, like, this is just nitpicking because self-defense itself is biblical, and we have a long tradition of this. The Old Testament teaches that self-defense is biblical. You even have a duty to, as a man, defend your wife and kids, and you have to put your life on the line. In fact, when I was married in the church, we had, oaths that we say, will you give your life for her? Well, is that not talking about self-defense? I mean, that's crazy. So James Lindsay has no idea what he's talking about with just overall Christian ethics and moral and the history of the church, right? So he goes on to say, Peter draws the sword. Jesus rebukes him for it. His disciples weren't armed to fight back. I think the point, though, is that even though Jesus knew, and they knew they were not going to have an armed insurrection, the principle of having the swords shows us that Jesus is not opposed to self-defense. In other words, the state itself having the ability to execute those who are worthy of the death penalty, a la Romans 13, that itself is a form of self-defense, right? The state executing the death penalty is self-defense. And there's also individual self-defense. So it's the principle of being able to have weapons in self-defense, even though, of course, Jesus wasn't saying that take these swords, we're going to go overthrow the Romans. That's the zealot position. But it still shows the principle of self-defense.
Well, it sounds to me like, because James Lindsay thinks that Christian nationalism is like a Nazi movement.
Yeah, he thinks it's a psyop, which is ridiculous because it's his position that's actually the psyop.
Yeah, and what Andrew did brilliantly, I'm glad you're going to review the trigonometry thing because he argues for it. Christian nationalism from his view is not this idea that we're going to have an armed insurrection and take over the government. We're going to fight a new crusade. That's not what he's saying at all. He says what you were saying earlier, which is that as Christians, from our worldview, we are using our Christian worldview to determine morality, which is how you figure out what laws you're going to have and how you're going to govern your society, what is socially acceptable and not, and all those sorts of things. And he did a great job of breaking down Constantine's like liberal presuppositions, which are the same ones that James Lindsay holds. So of course I knew that's why he's upset about it, but he's acting like Andrew is out here calling for like an armed crusade or an armed insurrection to overthrow the U.S. government or something, which is
they're doing
not what he's saying.
No, but you know what's funny is that did you see earlier in the show? So Ruslan and Gavin Ortlund are implying similar types of things. They're saying that ortho bros are now dangerous and dark things are coming and they're going to be hyped up. And Ortlund said today, these people are extremists. Of course, he doesn't say who he's talking about. He's obviously talking about us. And they're dangerous and all this kind of stuff. When in reality, none of us are ever calling for violence. We're talking about the principle of self-defense and the Christian doctrine of the state. And these people are liars, and they repeat what sounds like an SPLC script. So I'm not surprised that James Lindsay repeats similar types of scripts. James Lindsay is in an open relationship with his wife and has been for a long time. He's a complete phony. And that's why he absolutely refused 4 different times an offer to do a public debate.
Yeah, I've offered to debate him on feminism multiple times because he gets a whole bunch of that wrong and insists that, you know, feminism is not the same thing as egalitarianism. And you know, I've challenged him on that and his whole liberal ethos. And all he does is block me and say that, you know, I'm some kind of pick-me or whatever. He does that whole thing, so...
Yeah, I mean, and I tried, of course, again, here's another example where people say, oh, you're being mean. No, I tried being very, very friendly with James Lindsay for several years, actually. We went on 2 or 3 podcasts together. We had good conversations. In fact, I was even at an event where we had a 3-way debate between me, him, and whoever that fat Calvinist pastor is. I forget his name. Me and that fat Calvinist guy were just going at it like hardcore, and Lindsay was there just kind of laughing and kind of stayed out of it. But, you know, we had a 3-way discussion on whether or not America and Americanism are what Christianity was actually trying to promote, right? Because you have these Calvinist guys who think that in this situation, they were saying, oh, Nick Fuentes is the face of the woke right that is going to take down, you know, America and change the Constitution. And then that led into a debate about where I was arguing, I don't agree with Nick on everything, but I was arguing, well, actually Nick's not wrong in principle in saying that the church and the state have a role of helping to guide society together. And there's no such thing as this idea of a secular state or the Enlightenment Freemasonic idea of the separation of church and state like Roger Williams taught, right? And that just blows these people's minds, right? They absolutely lose it. And they will immediately call you, you know, everything in the book. So let's play his response here.
This idea of like Christian pacifism and Christians being pussies, I don't know where that came from.
Britain, I think.
Boy, that was never.
So what about the teachings of Jesus Christ?
Now, this is so low tier, right? Like, obviously, if you're familiar with church history, we have so many warrior saints. You have countless kings that were saints. The Old Testament is full of people like David, you know, heroes of the faith, or Samson even. And if you read Hebrews 11, when Paul cites heroes of the faith, he also includes people who put to flight the wars and the foreigners and those of the enemy. So there's this idea that now that Jesus came, everything is now, quote, spiritual. That's actually the Marcionite position. The idea that God has nothing to do with the state, that's the Roger Williams position that we outlined last night and today, which is the Gavin Ortlund. Again, Al Mohler, the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, invites on the CIA guys and the consultants and the counterintelligence people and pushes CIA lines that we've got to be doing espionage in other countries, and it's biblical because we got to fight Putin. So he just repeats the normie CIA stuff. And even if you think that's legitimate, that's night and day. Imagine Roger Williams, their spiritual forefather, saying that we got to have spies in other countries for the superstate, for the American empire. It's just retarded. It's the opposite of what the whole Baptist tradition was about, namely disestablishmentarianism. The idea there is no role that the state has to God. There's a separation, not just of church and state, but God from state. That's Roger Williams.
Which ones do you want to dive into?
Well, I was raised as Catholic, so I'm not as well versed in scripture as you. When he was on the cross,
he doesn't know his own Catholic teaching for the last 1,600 years in the West. is the same position that the state has a duty to God. The state can execute criminals. You have a right to self. What Christian country has forbade the basic principles of self-defense? Now, you could say maybe the class system in Britain didn't allow people to have like swords and stuff like that at various times. But in general, the principle of Christian nations in the history of the church has allowed for self-defense. And again, the idea of having a Christian army that defends against invaders and foreigners, there's nothing, that's just taking the self-defense principle and applying it on a larger scale. And imagine actually arguing that, no, actually you have no right to self-defense. Remember Seraphim Aldea, that Marxist pacifist libtard that tries to argue against all the Orthodox converts in America, he says are satanic? That's what he said. He said, I went to all of the American parishes and churches, and I didn't find one true convert. These were converts of the devil. Remember him saying that? Just outrageous, just total insane levels of prelest. The dude lives on an island under the protection of a state. Is he going to say that when the Muslims come into his little Scottish island or wherever he is? What's he going to say when the Muslims show up there? Is he going to appeal to pacifism? No, he's living under the benefits of a state that protects him, at least for this present time, against foreign invaders. Now, all of Europe is being invaded intentionally, by design, by oligarchs, bringing in zillions of infinity Muslims and others. So they're going to learn what their open borders pacifism, fake ass Christianity is actually going to get them when the Muslims come in, as they are doing right now. So all of these libtards who push this absolute made up pacifist idea, it doesn't exist in church history. And they'll pick out a monastic saint talking about vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. That's monastic life. That's not the state. And Nicaea already said in its canons, there's nothing antithetical to being a Christian and being a soldier. So that you understand, we've already had this debate. This debate happened in the 2nd and 3rd century because you had some groups amongst the church saying, like Roger Williams and the Baptists think, you can't have anything to do with the state because the state is the beast and it's Satan. Okay, we had this low tier Baptist level debate in the 2nd and 3rd century. And Nicaea already ruled on this, that there's nothing antithetical to being a soldier and being a Christian. And one of the arguments they use is John the Baptist saying to the soldiers say, John, what must we do to be right with God? And he says, don't mistreat people and don't take people's tax money or tax them more than they deserve. That was Nicaea's proof text. Well, obviously, if God didn't believe in self-defense or armies, John the Baptist would have said, you need to leave the army. You must leave it. This is so low tier. Like, it's just so silly. I mean, imagine thinking in the Middle Ages that when you have basically a Christian society, whether it's Byzantium or whether it's, a French village in the 1100s, like imagine thinking that, oh, you're not supposed to have any kind of borders or walls or defense. It's just retarded. Like, everyone would just think you're insane. Like, what are you talking about? We have a castle because we have freaking looters and invading armies that come through here. So we're not supposed to have it's just retarded. Like, people are so dumb and living in some fantasy world because we've grown up in this peaceful post-World War II environment where they just think that, oh, everybody's cool and liberal. No, the Somalians coming into your neighborhoods, the Muslims coming into your neighborhood, they don't have the same, they don't care about civic nationalism and the Constitution and all this bullshit. They don't care about that. And you're going to find out that they don't care about that. You're already finding out. All the people in Britain are begging us in our country to help and figure out how to not let that happen here. Why? Why would they be begging us? If the Muslims are all going to be cool, dude. Everybody's going to be cool, bro. We'll all team up together.
Them, Lord, for they know not what they do.
Of course. And you should forgive people. I absolutely agree with that. I may forgive a man who attempted to rape my wife, but I'm going to kill him in the attempt, right? Like,
that's actually correct. It is not murder to practice self-defense. This is so basic, and people should know this. Does anybody, do you guys not realize that? What do you think would happen if somebody tried to get into the Vatican and do something to Pope Leo? What do you think would happen? You think Pope Leo would just lay there and let the butt buddies do whatever they want with him? Actually, in the case of the Pope, they might, right? But in theory, no. In practice, probably not, right? I mean, imagine somebody breaking into the Moscow Patriarchate, right? Do you think they would try to, oh, yeah, cool, just let him be pacifist, be pacifist? They would immediately assassinate him. He would be immediately taken out. Somebody rushes the Pope Mobile, what do you think those 16 security guards are going to do? They're going to take him out immediately. Duh. The papacy practices self-defense. It has a giant Leonine wall around the papacy. It's a city-state. You can't just walk in there. You think you can just bust up in the Vatican Bank, be like, yeah, I'm here. I want to take all the cash, and you got to let me do it because of pacifism. You're going to be immediately arrested. Yes, you have a duty to unalive a person who is trying to unalive your family members. And if you don't do that, you have failed. I took an oath when I got married to do that. I have to lay down my life should someone try to come at Jamie. That's why we carry implements of self-defense when I go places. I have that duty. If I don't do that, I fail at my duties as a husband, as a man. And it's so insane to me that I look over here at the Catechism of Trent, their own Roman Catholic teachings, and they said that of course the church teaches the death penalty. It's part of the sixth commandment. And now Roman Catholic weirdos on podcasts act like Christianity is pacifism. That's the Marcionite view.
I don't, which thing's contradictory here? It's like, I can forgive my enemies, but that doesn't mean I need to let them crush me.
Drink too much milk theology.
Well, I mean, this guy sitting here looks like a total soy man, whoever this guy is. But yeah, it's like, there's nothing contradictory about saying that I have a duty to unalive. It's like the same with warfare, right? If I unalive people in warfare, I'm fulfilling the duty to defend my country. Let's say for the sake of argument that it's not some fake ass war or something that, we're fighting for Israel. If we're actually fighting for the defense of the country, like I have a duty to do that. And it's not ideal, but the church has for a long time said, yeah, we just talked about this with Pajot. Pajot came on and said, look, Orthodoxy is not pacifist. We recognize the unfortunate nature of this world requires things like warfare. It requires things like, assassinations even, perhaps. I'm not advocating for an assassination of a political leader. I'm just saying, like, in the history of Israel, for example, you'll see that there are spies, there is espionage, there are military tactics and techniques. They're all throughout the Bible. And the history of the church understood that reality. And it's not condoning every single act of violence or something like that to say, yes, there is a kind of just war. I would argue, yeah, there is a just war. It might be more scholastic and technical in the way that, like, Tim Gordon formulates it from Thomas Aquinas. But I think Thomas Aquinas is not really explicating anything that different from the way that the Byzantine leaders and patriarchs and armies would have thought about it. For example, under Empress, I think it was Irene, one of the empresses, she actually named a bunch of the military divisions after various saints. And that was That was normal in Byzantium. Nothing weird or bizarre about that. So all of this stuff that we're dealing with nowadays, again, it's radical Reformation teaching. It's not the Protestant reformers. They all believe what I say. Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, they would agree. Well, maybe not Zwingli, but Luther and Calvin at least would agree with what I'm saying. The state has a right to execute people. You have a right to self-defense. Death penalty is true and right. They all taught that. But what ended up winning is the radical Reformation, which did stress in many cases pacifism and the idea that the state is of God, or not of God, it's of Satan. Just crazy stuff, right? Disestablishmentarianism. That's what most of these evangelicals and even normie Roman Catholics like this guy, they think that's what Christianity is. It's radical Reformation, George Fox, Testament of Anne Lee pacifism.
Me. I can forgive people who've done me wrong. Doesn't mean I need to let them do me more wrong.
This is correct. It is technically correct that you can unalive a person and also forgive them. That is our duty as a Christian. It's not required that I resent and hate a person even if they do me wrong and I have to, in a certain case, unalive them. Think about all the situations in the history of the church where people had to defend their family or their kids. Does that make everybody in that case a murderer? That's just crazy. Does it mean that you then have to hate the people? No, it doesn't. So this is absolutely correct.
I can forgive people for doing horrible acts against me. It doesn't mean I need to continue to let them do horrible acts against me.
This is exactly right. Like, who actually doesn't agree with that? People might have criticisms of Andrew, whatever, but that point, that position is correct. There's nothing in theologically incorrect there.
Christian ethics has been widely bastardized by progressive leftists as being some kind of like hippie religion. It is definitely not.
That's absolutely correct.
Not. It never has been, and I don't know where that came from. Yes, it's true the teachings of Jesus Christ are very heavy on loving your neighbor and understanding forgiveness and understanding the mode of sin, and that most people are going to engage in sin, so we need the forgiveness of Jesus Christ for that. That's true. But it's not a pacifistic religion, and it never has been a Jesus told one of his disciples to sell a cloak and buy a sword. But these were not pacifists. Jesus ran money changers out of a temple with a braided cord that he made out of leather and whipped them out of the temple.
Yeah, so again, there are times for these types of actions, right? What does Ecclesiastes say? There's a time for war, a time for peace, a time for mourning, a time for joy. And a lot of people don't understand the nuances and what we call decorum or propriety when it comes to these types of topics, right? For example, there's a time for celebration. Jesus attended the wedding at Cana and he drank wine. Does that mean that every day is a wine drinking wedding celebration? No, of course not. Go ahead. What?
I was joking.
What'd you say? You cut out. I didn't hear.
I was saying, wait, what?
You don't know that. Well, I'm just saying. You know how evangelicals will like take a verse and act like that's the verse for everything at all times, right? Like you should never. Like there was a guy on Twitter today saying.
Whatsoever.
There was a guy on Twitter saying today, it's ungodly if you ever make a joke. Like this like mega piety signaling stuff. And it's like, I mean, you think there's no time for mirth? That's crazy. Like there's read Ecclesiastes. Like there's a time for all of these things. There's a season for these things. And the absurdity of evangelicalism or the way these childish people interpret the scriptures is like they take one verse and they think that that's over everything else, right? Like, well, God says, love your neighbor and not to judge. Okay, but he also says judge with righteous judgment. So you're picking out one verse to piety signal and ignoring the other places where you have to obviously make judgment calls. So if you're in an alley and your wife is, got her purse out and there's some, thug dude that's coming down the alley and he looks suspicious, are you not going to make a judgment call? It's just retarded. Everybody is. Of course it is. Of course you are. So, I think, even if the selling of the sword might not have been the most pertinent example, you could have said Romans 13, that there are examples of self-defense. The principle of Jesus having his disciples have the sword still is a principle of self-defense. So I think Andrew is overall absolutely correct. I would have used Romans 13, but so what? It's not. This doesn't. I mean, James Lindsay is just capitalizing on this to say that we're all bad because the woke right is an op, and he's just mouthing what